Have you ever felt like you're just stuck in a waiting room? Waiting for that new job, for an answer to a prayer, or just for the next chapter of your life to finally kick off? It's something we all go through. So today, we're going to dive into the very last words of the Old Testament from the book of Malachi to uncover a really powerful, ancient answer to that very modern question. So let's jump right in. The entire text we're looking at today really revolves around this one big question you see here. But what shall we do while we wait? You can almost feel the weight of that question, right? It was on the minds of the people of Israel back then, and honestly, it's the question that's going to frame everything we talk about today.
You have to imagine the scene. The people of Israel were in this long, quiet period. All these huge promises had been made, but nothing seemed to be happening. They were caught in the in-between, a feeling I think a lot of us can relate to. It's that feeling of waiting for a breakthrough, for some clear direction in life. They really needed some guidance.
And boom! Here's the guidance they get, right at the very end of the book. Malachi lays out this amazing two-part answer. Did you catch it? First, he tells them to look back and remember the law. But then, he tells them to look forward, saying, "See, I will send the prophet Elijah." So let's break down that first part, the looking back. Okay, so the first instruction is all about remembering. But why? Why was remembering this ancient law, the one given to Moses, so critical for people who were supposed to be waiting for the future? Well, the core problem Malachi points to is essentially a kind of spiritual amnesia. The people had just forgotten. They lost track of the covenant, the laws, the very foundation of who they were and their relationship with God. And without that solid ground beneath them, they were just adrift, which makes it pretty much impossible to wait well. So the solution proposed in the text is to find what it calls an orientation point. You can think of it like a North Star or a fixed point on a compass. It's that one thing you can always look back to get your bearings and figure out which way's forward, especially when you feel totally lost. So here's the key takeaway. An orientation point is a foundational truth that guides and directs your life. For the Israelites, that was God's law. And it wasn't just a list of do's and don'ts. It was their compass for living, the one unchanging reference point in a world full of uncertainty.
And this is such a brilliant, practical example of the whole idea. The Israelites were actually commanded to wear tassels on their clothes. Why? As a constant, physical, visual reminder. Every single time they glanced down and saw them, they were supposed to remember their orientation point, God's commands, and live by them. It was a tangible tool to fight against that spiritual amnesia.
All right, so that's the look back part of the answer. But now, let's get to the second part, which is all about looking forward. Because after telling them to remember their foundation, Malachi tells them to wait with real anticipation. And this wasn't just some vague, fuzzy hope. No, it was a specific promise. Someone is coming. This one sentence must have totally changed the feeling of waiting. It injected purpose and expectation into it. They weren't just waiting for something to happen. They were now waiting for someone. Of course, a promise like that raises a huge question. Who is this Elisha? Are they talking about the famous prophet from the book of Kings, the one who was taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire? Was he literally going to come back? The text just leaves you hanging, inviting you to figure out the mystery. And the answer to that mystery is what beautifully connects the Old and New Testaments. It reveals a new figure, someone who would show up in the spirit and power of Elijah. And there it is. The New Testament makes it crystal clear. The promised figure is John the Baptist. Jesus himself even says about John, he is the Elijah who was to come. So what was it about John that made him the perfect fulfillment of this ancient prophecy? When you actually put them side by side, the parallels are pretty striking. Look at this. Both were outsiders, living these rugged lives out in the wilderness. Both of them fearlessly called out the corrupt leadership of their day. And, most importantly, their core message was identical. Repent, turn back to God. Their lives, their missions, they just echo each other. But here is the absolute key to understanding both of them. John the Baptist, just like the original Elijah, was not the main event. His entire purpose was to be a giant flashing signpost. He wasn't the destination, he was the guy on the side of the road pointing everyone to the destination. And this quote just captures his mission perfectly. He was a voice. His job was to prepare people, to clear a path, and to turn everyone's attention away from himself and onto the one who was coming right after him. Jesus. So let's pull all these threads together. How does this ancient advice
look back to your foundation and look forward to the promise. How does that apply to us right now, as we're waiting for our own futures to unfold?
What Malachi gives us is this incredibly practical, two-part strategy for how to wait faithfully. You ground yourself by looking back at the foundation God has already laid down, and at the same time, you energize yourself by looking forward, preparing for what God is about to do.
And here is the ultimate conclusion, where it all comes together. For the Christian faith, Jesus becomes the complete fulfillment of both of those commands. He is the living embodiment of the law, he is the foundation, and he is the one that all the prophets, like John the Baptist, were pointing toward. I just love how the source text phrases this. The orientation point isn't a list of rules anymore, it's a person. Jesus is described as the kernel and star, the very center of gravity around which everything else revolves. He becomes the ultimate reference point for life. So, we end right back where we started, but now the question is for you. While you're in your own season of waiting, for whatever is next, for that new chapter, for clarity, what's your foundation? What's that fixed point, that North Star that guides you and keeps you steady? What is your orientation point?